Go ahead, Matthew.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for having me here today. Matthew Reed, I'm the head of development for sustainable finance at EDF. So the remarks I bring are sort of through the angle of finance and how it can be a lever for collective action. So that comes back, Stefan, to your question, what do we want from COP26? And I think just as an initial remark, it's important to acknowledge that I think the pressure to do something is more widespread this year, even than it was at the last COP. So the last COP, we saw a lot about Greta and the youth movement, but now clearly it's expanded. I think some of the events of the last year that some of our previous speakers alluded to have heightened that. But I think what's at stake today and what COP26 I think can trigger is collective action. And I think channeling finance is a way to do that. I think industry and banks and multilateral financing governments must really all agree to zero emitting technologies and need to distance themselves from unabated fossil fuels. So we've talked about that, but I think that's an important lever for action. And what's needed today from these decision makers are consistent policies, and these are policies that recognize the value of zero emitting or CO2 abating technologies. So Isabella talked about the power that renewables can have in decarbonizing the grid, but also the need for other technologies. And we think that it should be a technology neutral approach. So we need taxonomies, for example, that are inclusive of all zero CO2 emitting technologies. For us, this clearly includes nuclear. We think nuclear is already achieving climate goals at scale. So to use another financial angle, if you look at FTSE's recently issued in the sovereign bond index, and it's weighted based on sovereign climate emissions, you'll see countries that have zero emitting technologies, such as France, heavily overweighted in this index. And there you can see the outcome of a low carbon mix at the sovereign level. So we think, again, a technology neutral approach is needed, and this comes back to Isabella's remarks as well. Just a brief word about EDF, and we can get more into the details. We've signed on to the Climate Ambition Alliance ahead of the COP, which this initiative is targeted at helping countries to be more ambitious in their nationally determined contributions through NDCs. As established in the Paris Agreement, it includes firm actions on adaptation and obviously the participation of the private sector. And we believe this COP is a real opportunity to show the relevance of carbon neutral technologies such as renewables, such as nuclear. And the fact that it's happening in the UK is significant, I think. We saw in December in parallel, the UK did some announcements related to their objective reducing CO2 emissions. If I'm not wrong, I think by 2030, the objective is a 68% reduction. In parallel, there was a report issued, as most of you are obviously aware, about the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. And there we saw a technology neutral approach that I think is favorable to how we see this unfolding. So those would be my initial remarks. I think it's also worth touching on, we pay close attention, obviously, to what's happening at the European level, and we think it's a strong signal from the European Council, this recent commitment to reduce emissions by 55%. But as we've already discussed, many other countries need to follow suit. That's how we see the context. That's how we see our role. I'm happy to go into any other details, and following on to Isabella's perfect management of time, I'm going to stop there after 5 minutes.
Nice one. Thanks, Matthew, for that. I'm not sure if I'll be able to stick to 5, do less or more. You know, I'm not always the best at timekeeping, but you know, I have to follow suit for sure. And really grateful and thankful to be part of this fantastic panel and webinar. Thanks, Charles, for the invite and everybody involved. I think it's a great opportunity to really make an ask of what do we want from COP26. Really, I think it's a great opportunity, and it's brilliant that we're starting early. You know, we're in January. We've got 10, 11 months ahead of COP, and we really have to drive this action. I think like Matthew said, there's been last year I think was a big testament of how the corporate and the governments are moving towards mitigating climate change, which has been great to see. We as an organization, I work for Schneider Electric, and perhaps I should introduce myself and what I do and the organization. So we're the leader in energy automation and sustainability across the world. And I particularly work for their energy and sustainability services division of Schneider Electric, and part of the work we do is support our large corporate customers in their journeys to decarbonization, supporting with their climate change mitigation strategies, roadmaps, and towards implementation. So, whenever we talk to our clients, one of probably the biggest or the best case studies is our own. How we are decarbonizing our operations. We're committed to full carbon neutrality by 2040 for all end-to-end supply chains, so scopes 1, 2, and 3. And I think that movement towards large corporates taking over and embracing climate change mitigation is a great opportunity. And what that we just need to carry on that momentum really. And obviously it's great to be talking about the developing world and what's happening, but obviously we've got or the developed world rather. But obviously there's this countries like India and China still growing significantly. You've got Africa with a massive expected growth in their population and obviously the energy required to deal with our population growth. So I think it's really important that we, as the developed world, supports the developing world in a way with the policies and enabling technologies that can support limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. Because obviously there's a lot of we've had our run in growth. I think it's fair to say. Obviously I think this crisis has shown us that we probably have to learn to live without this crazy growth in operations and make it sustainable. So I think it's really important to give access to energy to the developing world in a sustainable manner. Again, I think Isabella's touched on coal plants and the problems that has, and I guess a lot of the growth and the energy demand is being met by coal currently. So we need to find solutions, and we need to renewable is not the answer to everything. As we say, intermittency is never ideal. So we need transition fuels that are sustainable. Really great to hear Matthew's points on nuclear and what EDF is doing there and is supporting that transition, as well as what can the industry and governments do around sustainable fuels and things like hydrogen. There's a lot of talks about that, but obviously we need to accelerate that. So we need to make sure that governments in COP26 are enabling these technologies and making bureaucracy easier. There's a lot of funds and next-gen funds coming into for investments in Europe. So we need to make sure that the bureaucracy attached to it is quite significant, as we can see with some of our clients. So we need to make it easier, access to funds, and fund this renewable growth and alternative fuels and also energy efficiency measures, which I think is probably the first step. First be efficient and then replace, and then you can replace your energy use by more sustainable sources, I would say. And I think probably only just made it to the 5 minutes. So I'll leave it up to Charles and Gary and Stefan to ask us whatever questions you want us to ask.
Stefan, would you like to say something?
Yes, so I wanted to ask the panelists how they would go if you go to COP26. What would be your ask in one sentence?
I can go first. I will represent my own interests and not others. I'd say let's put a price on CO2, higher price, I would say.
Great, thank you. Who wants to go next, Matthew or Lewis?
No disagreement here. I think a real price for carbon is important. Just to say something different, I think I would ask for consistent policies that recognize the value of zero emitting or CO2 abating technologies. I think CO2 pricing is a really good tool to give a signal, and it gives visibility into future investment, but the emphasis there being on the nature, the zero or low carbon nature of the technologies involved.
Okay, Lewis.
And on my side, I would say just subsidies and policies, across the globe, especially for developing countries around, low carbon technologies really, and just accelerating the transition to better, less emitting fuels. I think hydrogen is a great tool there. It's not about electrifying absolutely everything. I think we'll have to look for a balanced and alternative. Really, it can't just be one solution. We have to work in collaboration, partnership, and find a balanced system.
Okay, well, I've been listening carefully to what people have been saying here. So in the last presentation, Ryan Hagan said, think about asking for something which is politically unacceptable. Ask to push the boundary, push the envelope. And listening to the discussion here, I would say I'm becoming persuaded that the value of closing down coal. Now, I know Stefan's been talking about this for a long time, and it's just all seemed too difficult. But hearing the discussion today, the critical need for net zero by 2040, all of this, if the pressure is put on, I mean, what's clear from the way humanity works is that if the pressure is put on, people respond. I mean, who would have thought, the whole coronavirus story? We've got vaccines being rolled out now. Okay, so if the pressure is put on, if the governments just say, look, we are going to close down coal, we're going to give crazy short timescales for it, then other solutions will come out of the woodwork, other things will happen. It's a matter for me of go for it. So, Stefan, you've been trying this for years. What do you think? Go for it with closing coal. How's it going to work?
Yeah, so in 2016 we set out with this petition that we've called Exit Coal Now. You can please go ahead and sign it, by the way, and join saving our planet. I mean, we need more support. But anyway, it's been about this. Okay, why are we not able to shut down coal power plants? There are multiple reasons for that. But actually, Martin just asked a great question, which is, okay, nuclear requires subsidies, and it's only 5% of the production, etc. I mean, we cannot keep on rambling about these debates, nuclear versus renewable. It doesn't make sense. It's really about reducing our CO2 emissions. If we play one low carbon solution against the other, who wins? Fossil fuels. It's that simple. So we don't have a choice. We need to go maximum blast on all the low carbon solutions. And then the economy will decide. I mean, if one low carbon solution is too expensive, it will develop slower than the cheaper one. That's one point. The second point is the price of electricity. If the price of electricity is too high, what happens is that people keep their gas boilers, their fuel boilers, and their diesel cars because it's cheaper than electricity. So it's really a challenge for electric power generation and industrial companies and electric distribution and, energy efficiency companies.
I'm going to set you a challenge because we're rolling into the next debate, and I had a little bit of time in politics, believe it or not, and I didn't enjoy it. But the one thing I learned is that politicians say that their manifesto, they have so many things in their manifesto, but the public, rightly or wrongly, only understand 3 big messages. Now, the solution is infinite. We have so many messages going out. So I'm going to ask my distinguished panel, if you could get 3 messages out, because that's the difficult thing. We need to really define what are the 3 big ones, whether that be population or whatever, fossil fuels, whatever you like. So I'm going to zip around here because there's not long, and I really want to introduce you to the next panelists that are going to come in. So if you could give me, we'll start with Charles. Charles, you're only allowed 3 big messages that you want to go out, solution-wise.
I think it is as I said just now, I think coming out of this panel, I think stop coal is critical. We haven't talked about it here because it's just not been on subject, but planting trees helps buy us more time. We can potentially buy achieve 10% of CO2 emissions removed each year by planting more trees. So, you know, one of my objectives is about making it easy for people to plant trees and plant trees in bulk. We are saying to people today, if you'd like to donate £30, we can give you 270 trees, and those remove the best part of 1.5 tons of CO2. So I would say that. So hand over to someone else who'd like to go next.
I like keeping people on their toes. Charles, you decide who you'd like to ask next.
Okay, Isabella.
I was muted. Yes.
You get three messages you're allowed to put out, not because the public don't have the capability of understanding, but I think that one of our challenges is we have so many solutions that the public get confused. You're allowed 3. Go for it. 3 messages you really want to get out there.
Oh, I've got one more, which is stop deforestation. Sorry, but
Fair enough. Well, we restated the messages of before, so let's put a steadily increasing price on CO2 in financial markets and in our economies. Let's stop coal power plants as ASAP, essentially, as soon as we know we can meet energy demand in a sustainable fashion and keeping electricity prices stable, because this is a challenge that Stefan has raised. Third message would be clearer and try to prioritize more with at the core of this challenge, such as projects in parks, nuclear islands, whatever it takes to actually enable this transition in the fastest fashion possible.
Brilliant. You get to decide who's next. 3 choices.
Louis, up to you.
Louis, up to you.
I thought we were going to keep the same flow, so yeah, thank you.
Great.
I was ready with my messages, so that's good. So I think for me, and this is kind of linked to some of the work we do in Schneider Electric with supporting this transition and helping our clients with their climate journey. So I was thinking about it, and actually this is something that we can, that corporates can do, that governments can do, and that individuals can do. I'm going to quote you, Isabella, here when you started your fantastic speech at the beginning. This is an energy challenge. 75% of emissions come from energy generation, energy usage. So if it's an energy challenge, one thing that we can all do is first to be more efficient in our energy use. Okay. Once we've reduced our consumption as much as possible, then we can replace or offset, with replace our fossil fuel usage if we burn natural gas, or if you can't do it because there's no technology available, at least offset, by planting trees. Okay. And then thirdly, then engage with, we talk about supply chains here, which is I think is a big example of how you can take the message wider. But as an individual, you can tell your family, you can tell your friends, you can tell your colleagues, on just drive that message, drive that we need to be sustainable, and I think that's pretty simple. So reduce, replace or offset, and engage with your environment and your ecosystem, so you can solve the challenge. We can all solve it together.
I like that. Who are you going to choose next?
Well,
2 to choose from.
Okay, I was thinking you, Gary. What do you think now?
Okay, if I had 3 wishes, I'd like to, this is controversial. I'd like families, when they're planning their family, to think about the impact on having more than one. Controversial. I definitely would like to get the message out that planting trees is inexpensive and no headache. And then I'd love people to look at their menu and look at thinking about reducing the amount of meat they eat. And that doesn't even include fossil fuels. I'm annoyed. I'll squeeze that one in as a bonus. Matthew, over to you. There's too many.
I like all of that, and the touching on the food supply, I think, is really it's I think getting more visibility now. But what a great point to make. Yeah, so I think for me, I kind of look at it through the lens of where I sit. We've talked about this a lot already. We need an accurate price on carbon. So one thing we haven't talked about, for example, is the idea of a carbon border adjustment mechanism. That's something we support, but let's talk about that later. Again, I also think we need taxonomies, that is to say, ways of identifying sustainable or low carbon technologies. But to come back to the point that Stefan made, they need to be laser focused on the climate problem, on CO2 emissions, taking a technology neutral approach, and recognizing the urgency of the situation. So we need real low carbon or net zero taxonomies that take a technology neutral approach. That's the second thing. And then the third thing, we've talked about closing coal plants. EDF has a plan related to that, but I think on the whole, one thing we've touched on only very lightly is the idea of a just transition, especially in developing nations. So as we make this transition, how do we make sure that that workers, that populations aren't overlooked from the employment and economic development perspective? It's totally possible, we can do it, but that's a big idea. And obviously that's been a subject at the COP. We saw that in Poland. But that's a really important theme if we're going to talk about closing coal plants. And then I'm just going to, because Gary did it, I'm going to add an annex. It's just to say, let's not overlook the link with biodiversity here. There's a COP15, we're talking about COP26. There's a COP15 this year that was pushed out around biodiversity. This is going to be a huge year for biodiversity. The link between climate and biodiversity is really obvious. I think we're going to increasingly see reporting standards around biodiversity, greater standardization. I think it's an absolutely critical issue. We're trying to take proactive steps on that. We've done some really exciting things in the last year, but it's a super important issue that's tightly tied into the climate. And
all power to you for pushing the boundaries. Stefan, that's what we need, push boundaries. Stefan, over to you, sir.
Okay. Yeah, well, I agree with what the other panelists have said. We need to really rethink the entire system. But also we need to communicate. I see, and we're seeing discussions where we don't agree on some topic. And there is one thing that I'm convinced about, is that we need to agree at some point about what we're going to do. And that comes back to the initial question, which is, okay, what does it mean to reduce our CO2 emissions and to capture CO2, because we will need to do some of that in order to protect the climate in the long run. So, of course, for the long-term solution, we have time to think, but for the next 10 years, we have a carbon budget that is almost gone, which means we really need to reduce our emissions by more than 50% in 10 years. And that's a real challenge. And you cannot do that by ruling out solutions because you think that they might be dangerous or that they might be too slow to develop when there is data which shows otherwise. It's very important that each one of us educate themselves about solutions, because if there are some solutions we don't believe in, we must make sure that this belief is supported by accurate and objective data. Otherwise, we are believing something which is not true, and that's not helpful to the debate.
Well, I don't.
We've got to stop now.
Yeah, we got to stop. But let me. Can I just say we had a power cut in North London. Shows you that the fossil fuels are not so good, right?